I wasn't supposed to hear it. The voice message was meant for my daughter's husband, not for me. But when I pressed play, I heard my own child's voice, cold as ice. My mother is a burden. We'll have her declared incompetent, move her into a facility, and take the house. She won't even fight it. My heart stopped. My daughter, the girl I sacrificed everything for, plotting my disappearance like I was already gone, and that was only the beginning. That night, sitting in my kitchen with the phone still in my hand, I realized my entire world had shifted. The woman I had raised, the daughter I thought would hold my hand in my final years, had become a stranger. This is where my story begins. I wasn't supposed to hear it. The message was meant for my son-in-law, not for me. But fate has a cruel way of pressing play when you least expect it. The phone buzzed on the counter as I rinsed dishes in the sink. The late Charleston sun filtered through the kitchen window, catching the dust motes in the air and laying golden stripes across my wooden table. I glanced at the screen. The name lit up in bold letters. Elena Wright Arrow Damon, my daughter to her husband. Nothing unusual. Curious, I tapped the notification, expecting to hear some small reminder, a grocery list, a laugh about their day, maybe a note about visiting me later. My thumb hovered a second too long, then I pressed play, and in a single breath my world collapsed. I can't keep doing this, Damon. Elena's voice burst into my quiet kitchen, sharp and impatient. My mother is a burden. The word burden didn't sound real at first. It hung in the air heavy, echoing against the walls I had painted with my own hands. A burden, me. The message kept going, faster now, as if she had been holding this venom inside. She's everywhere, always in the way. I open a drawer and her old papers are stuffed in there. I walk into the kitchen and she's hovering, asking questions, acting like she still runs the place. Damn, I can't breathe with her here. I want my own life back. I gripped the edge of the sink, my knuckles whitening. That voice, it was Elena's, yes, but it wasn't the Elena I raised. It was colder, harder, a stranger's voice coming from my daughter's throat. Damon's muffled voice came next, too low to make out clearly, but I caught enough. He wasn't disagreeing. He wasn't stopping her. He was listening, agreeing. Elena's tone turned sharper. The house is wasted on her. She can't keep it up, and you know it. The taxes, the yard, all of it, it's just sitting there while we're throwing money away on rent. I found out we can transfer the deed without her realizing. The clerk's office already told me what we need. Once that's done, she'll be out, and we'll finally have something for ourselves. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the phone. Transfer the deed. Without me realizing, my stomach turned cold. As if the betrayal wasn't enough, she laughed softly before finishing. Don't worry, Damon, it's easy. We'll tell her it's just a doctor's appointment. By Tuesday, she'll be at Maggie's Meadows and we'll have the house. She won't fight it. She can't. The message ended. The silence that followed was deafening. My hands shook as I set the phone down on the counter. For a moment, I could only hear the ticking of the wall clock and the low hiss of the kettle simmering on the stove. My knees felt weak, and I sank into the nearest chair. Maggie's Meadows. I whispered the name out loud. I knew that place. A senior facility across the river with cheerful brochures of smiling gray-haired residents holding paintbrushes. I had visited an old friend there once. Behind the flowers and the painted walls was loneliness, a quiet that felt like abandonment, and my daughter wanted to send me there. My Elena, the girl I carried in my arms through nights of fever. The girl whose prom dress I ironed at midnight when she was too nervous to sleep. The girl I thought would hold my hand when my time came. I pressed the phone against my chest as if I could force the words back inside and erase them. But the echo wouldn't leave. Burden, transfer, appointment, home. Somewhere deep inside, a voice rose, steady, firm, the same voice that guided me through decades as a nurse when chaos broke loose in the ER. Stay calm, breathe, remember everything. I straightened in my chair, wiped my eyes with the back of my sleeve, and whispered the words I never thought I'd say. My own daughter. I sat there for a long time after the message ended, staring at my own hands. They trembled slightly, still holding the phone, the veins blue and raised under skin that had worked a lifetime. My fingers looked worn, the nails short and practical, each wrinkle and scar telling its own story. Those hands had carried patience through pain when no one else would. They had mopped sweat from fevered brows, held newborns as their first cries filled delivery rooms, and pressed against chests, fighting for a heartbeat. But more than anything, those hands had built a life for Alina, piece by piece, sacrifice by sacrifice. I pressed my palms together and thought of hers. Alina's hands were soft, manicured, tipped in pale polish, always holding something delicate, an iced latte, a phone, a designer bag. They had never scrubbed blood from a floor, never worked through the night while the world slept. My hands had been my weapons of survival, hers had been allowed to simply be. That was my doing, my choice, my sacrifice. I remembered the first time, those tiny hands wrapped around my finger. She was just a few minutes old. Her father, already gone, vanished from the delivery room like a coward, never to return. I was 19, alone and terrified, but when Alina's fist closed around me, I promised her everything. I promised she would never feel the emptiness I felt in that moment. And so I worked. I worked double shifts in the ER, stumbling home at dawn, my scrubs soaked in the stories of strangers. I sold the gold bracelet my mother had left me just to buy Alina her school uniforms. Later, I sold my wedding ring, the one reminder of a man who abandoned us, so she could pay for her college textbooks. Every shiny thing I ever owned, I traded for a piece of her future. But there were moments that felt worth it. I remember her high school prom. She stood at the top of the stairs in a dress I couldn't afford but somehow found a way to rent. Her smile lit the entire room. She twirled for me, her hair pinned with silver clips I bought at the pharmacy. And for a moment, she wasn't the daughter of a single mother scraping by, she was a princess. I clapped my hands and laughed through tears, knowing the shoes I wore had holes in them, but she looked like magic. Then her college graduation. God, I'll never forget it. The sun was hot that day in Colombia, and my cheap dress clung to me like a second skin. But when they called her name and she walked across that stage in her black cap and gown, I felt taller than any woman alive. She hugged me afterward, mascara smudged from crying, and whispered, "Mom, this is ours. I couldn't have done it without you." And her wedding day, another moment carved deep into me. Alina glowed in white satin, her eyes shining, her hand trembling in mine before she walked down the aisle. I remember holding her bouquet while she adjusted her veil. "Thank you, Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "For everything, for being both parents, for never giving up on me." How cruel it is that the sweetest memories can turn into blades when betrayal arrives. Because sitting there in my living room, with the voice message still echoing in my head, those moments cut me open. I had built my entire world around her. Every sacrifice, every choice, Every weary night spent on aching feet, I told myself it would all be worth it, because my daughter would carry it forward. She was my legacy, my one true success. But now I knew the truth. The daughter whose life I had built brick by brick had decided I was no longer worth keeping in hers. There is no wound like the one carved by the child you raised with your own blood. Friends can betray you, siblings can fight you, even lovers can walk away. But when your own flesh, the very heart you carried inside you, turns cold against you, that is the betrayal that breaks not just your spirit, but your very sense of who you are. I looked down at my hands again. The skin was dry, the joints stiff, the calluses permanent. They were the hands of sacrifice. Elena's hands were smooth, unscarred, the hands of a life I had given her. And yet those same hands were now writing me out of my own story. And for the first time, I understood the truth that stung sharper than any knife. The life I had built for her had become the weapon she used against me. Looking back now, the voice message should not have surprised me as much as it did. The signs were already there, quiet ones, subtle ones, the kind you try to excuse when you love too much. But at the time, I told myself they were nothing. I told myself Elena was busy, Damon was tired, and life had simply pulled us in different directions. The distance began with silence. Elena used to call me nearly every day. Quick check-ins during her lunch breaks, long conversations in the evening while she cooked dinner. Lately, those calls had thinned to once a week, then every other week. And when she did call, it was short, her tone clipped, as though her voice had somewhere better to be. I told myself she was busy. Everyone is busy these days, right? But still, when the daughter you raised with your own two hands suddenly has no time for you, it's not the kind of silence you can ignore. It settles in your chest, heavy and loud. Then came the whispers. I remember one evening, stepping out back to water my hydrangeas. The air was thick with Charleston humidity, and the cicadas were screaming like they owned the night. That's when I heard Damon's voice, low, hushed, drifting across the yard. He was pacing near the fence line, phone pressed to his ear. "She'll sign soon," he muttered, pausing. "Don't worry, the papers will be ready." I froze where I stood, the garden hose still running, spilling water into the dirt until mud pooled around my shoes. Papers. Signing. His tone was urgent, businesslike, not the lazy drawl he used when making small talk with me. I wanted to march over and demand answers. But instead, I killed the hose, went inside, and pretended I hadn't heard a word. That's what love does, it convinces you to doubt your own ears. A week later, at Sunday dinner, the silence turned sharper. I had made pot roast, Elena's favorite when she was a girl. Damon invited one of his work friends, a tall man with a booming laugh, and we all sat at the table, the house smelling of rosemary and onions. Conversation was light until Elena turned to me and said, "Mom, you forgot to set out the salad. I told you twice earlier." Her tone was casual, but her eyes flicked toward the guest. It wasn't a daughter reminding her mother, it was a performance. I blinked. "I didn't forget, honey, I just hadn't put it out yet." But she pressed, smiling tightly. "It's okay, Mom, you've been misplacing things a lot lately. Damon says it happens with age." The guest chuckled awkwardly as though he'd been let in on a private family joke. I laughed too thin and brittle while my stomach twisted. It wasn't a joke. It was a seed, planted carefully in the soil of other people's ears. And then came the strangers. They showed up one after another, as if on a schedule I hadn't agreed to. A woman in a crisp navy suit introduced herself as a social worker. Just checking on your living arrangements, MS. Cole, she said, scribbling notes while her eyes scanned my living room. A week later, a man arrived claiming to be a cognitive specialist who wanting to ask me questions about the date and the president's name. I hadn't requested any of them. I hadn't signed up for evaluations or home visits. But Alina explained it away with a wave of her manicured hand. It's just routine, Mom, you know, for your health. I told myself it was kindness, but the visits felt like intrusions. Each stranger left behind a thin residue of doubt, like fingerprints on glass. By then, a storm had started to brew inside me. I felt it in the pauses at dinner, in the hushed phone calls on the porch, in the way Alina's smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. Something was wrong. I could sense it like a nurse senses when a patient is about to crash, a tightening in the air, a heaviness you can't quite name. And yet I doubted myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe Alina was just stressed. Maybe Damon's phone calls had nothing to do with me. Love makes you blind, but worse, it makes you second-guess the truth standing right in front of you. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan turning above me, whispering to myself, "Don't be dramatic, Serafina. Don't invent shadows where there's only light." But the silence in my house had teeth, and it was only a matter of time before it bit. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I sat alone in my living room with only the glow of the lamp beside me. My phone rested heavy in my hand. I told myself I shouldn't play the message again. Once was enough. But my fingers betrayed me. I pressed play. Alina's voice poured out, sharp and cold. "She's becoming impossible, Damon. Always hovering, always questioning. I can't stand it anymore." I clenched my jaw but kept listening. Damon's voice followed, calm, calculating. "It doesn't matter. In 2 weeks the papers will be ready. Once the doctor's report comes in, she'll be declared incompetent. After that, the transfer is automatic." My breath caught, declared incompetent. Papers, transfer. Alina laughed, my daughter's laugh, once so sweet, now twisted. "She won't even know what happened. We'll move her into a care facility, and with the deed in our name, we can finally renovate. Damon, it'll be ours." I stopped the message, my thumb trembling. But then I pressed play again, as if torture could somehow give me answers. The recording continued. Damon's voice dropped lower. "And the insurance is done. I forged her signature last month. Her pension will start routing directly to our account once she's inside. No one will question it." I froze. Insurance, pension, forgery. For a moment, the room spun. I looked around at the walls I had painted myself, the curtains I had sewn with tired fingers, the pictures of Alina smiling at every milestone of her life. And now, the same daughter whose smile once gave me reason to keep going had signed away my future as if I were already gone. Alina's voice again, casual as a summer breeze. "It'll be like she's already dead, except we won't have to wait." I dropped the phone into my lap, my whole body shaking. I had heard many kinds of pain in my years as a nurse. Grief, loss, the sharp cry of broken bones, but nothing compared to this. This was a wound without blood, a death while still breathing. To know that your own child has rehearsed your disappearance, step by step, as though planning a vacation, it is a grief too deep for words. I thought of my patients over the years who had slipped away quietly in their hospital beds. In a way, that seemed merciful compared to this. Betrayal by your own blood is not a death you can surrender to. It is one you must live through every single day. I sat in that silence for a long time, tears burning my eyes, anger and sorrow tangled in my chest. But beneath the ache, something else stirred, a pulse, a resolve. They thought I was weak. They thought I was fading, confused, too old to notice what was happening. But they were wrong. They had underestimated the woman who had raised a child alone, who had worked double shifts for decades, who had carried strangers through the valley of death and still kept her head high. No, I would not confront them. Not yet. Anger would only feed their plan. They would twist my words, use them as proof of confusion or instability. Instead, I would do what I had done all my life, work in silence. Patiently, steadily, quietly stitching together a plan that no one could unravel. I picked up my phone again, wiped my tears, and whispered into the empty room, "You think you buried me, but you only woke me up." That night, for the first time in months, I slept without fear, because fear had hardened into something stronger. Not revenge, survival. Morning came soft and slow, like a hand easing a curtain open. I woke before my alarm, as if the house itself had been waiting with me. The light that slipped through the blinds was thin and pale, the kind that makes everything look older and truer at once. I moved through the kitchen with quiet feet and found the red wool coat in the hall closet where I kept the things that meant the most. My mother's hat, an old copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, the box with the letters she'd written me when I was young and scared. My mother gave me that coat the winter I turned 30. She said it suited me, that I had the kind of face that looked better in brave colors. I had worn it to graduations and funerals, to the one wedding where I'd managed my nerves with a sleeve pulled tight across my palm. The coat was the exact color of the last sunset I'd seen with her, the kind of red that doesn't shout but says, with kind authority, "I am here." It felt right then to put it on that morning. I buttoned it with hands that felt unusually steady and looked at myself in the hall mirror. The reflection was familiar, soft silver at the temples, eyes that kept on working no matter the hour. But the coat made the reflection something else. Not just a woman who had been hurt, but someone who dared to hold her place in the world. I walked the few blocks to Marla's house. She lived 2 streets over in a bungalow that smelled like lemon oil and wool, every surface softened by quilts she'd sewn from memories. Marla and I had been friends since the first day I showed up at the hospital cafeteria with Alina asleep on my shoulder. She'd held my hand through lonely nights and fed me casseroles when money ran low. She was small, precise, and blessedly unromantic about life, qualities I'd grown to love. When she opened the door and saw me in the red coat, she didn't gasp or fawn. She stepped back, looked me up and down, and said, with the kind of truth only a friend gives, "That coat was made for you, Sierra. Sit, tell me everything." I poured out the basics, the message, the words, the names of places and people, Maggie's Meadows, the clerk, the forged signature. I watched Marla's face change from concern to a cool, practical sort of resolve. "Don't fight them with fury," she said, folding her hands like a woman setting a pattern in fabric. "You'll get burned. Fight them with evidence." She held my gaze. "You are a nurse, not a headline. Use what you know. Document. Record. Be legal and be boring. Boring wins cases." She made tea like she always did, an efficient ritual. As the kettle hummed, she leaned forward. "Sierra, anger is righteous, but it's an expensive currency. Use patience and proof. Get copies of everything. Make the bank talk to you in public, not over a polite phone. Make them show you the paper trail. Make them tell you in black and white who signed what and when." Her words landed like dropped coins into the hollow of me, practical, heavy, and useful. I had been thinking of confrontation as a single moment. Face them, play my cards, let the truth spill and purge. But Marla was right. This was not drama. This was a ledger. And ledgers don't lie if you keep them clean. On the walk back, my coat buttoned up and the air a little sharper, I stopped at the post office. I bought a simple notebook with a cardboard cover and a black elastic band. It was the kind of thing that smells faintly of paper and possibility. At home, I made a ritual out of the first entry. I set the notebook on my kitchen table under the lamp, took out a pen with a good nib, and wrote in steady, nursely handwriting, June 22, received voice message intended for Damon. Contents: plan to declare incompetence, transfer deed, placed at Maggie's Meadows. Mention of forged insurance signature and pension rerouting. Will begin documentation, bank records, phone logs, copies of doctor visits. The first line felt like a life raft thrown into a wide, dark sea. Every sentence after it I wrote clearer, with dates and times and little brackets where I could add proofs later. I wrote down what I'd said out loud into the recorder that evening, then transcribed it into the notebook. I listed names: Marla, sister me, the clerk at the general store who knows everyone. I wrote down the days Elena had visited and what had been rearranged in my house. Receipts, I wrote, mattered as much as voices. There was an odd comfort in the act. Writing things down turned them from accusations into facts. Facts could be verified. Facts could not be gaslit away. I also started another practice, one less formal but just as important, the little proof drawer. A drawer at the bottom of my kitchen table, lined with an extra napkin and an old postage stamp, became the repository of everything that seemed like proof. A bank slip I found in a pile. The printed brochure from Maggie's Meadows. The junk mail postmarked with that date. The business card the cognitive specialist left on my kitchen counter. Each piece went in the drawer labeled evidence in sticky, sensible letters. Marla visited often in the days that followed. She brought casseroles and asked she questions, neutral and sharp. Did you sign anything? When did the caseworker come? Who left the business card? She sat in my kitchen with her own pen and took notes on the pages beside mine. We compared calendars and our memories like women reconstructing a vase from shards. She taught me to make copies of everything, to never rely on a single document living in one place. You know, she said once, lowering her voice when we were both quiet, people who prey on elders usually look for speed and secrecy. They count on shame and your loyalty to them. You're undoing both things. That's how you win. The work was meticulous and strangely soothing. Day by day, I built a small archive. I learned to call the bank and ask, politely but firmly, for signed authorization forms. I made appointments with my doctor on my schedule and asked for copies of any notes they might have made. I called the county clerk to ask, without specifics, about the process and how a transfer usually occurred. I logged every call and who I spoke to, names, dates, times. It was boring work, document after document, but there was empowerment in every phone number written with a time stamp next to it. And beneath that practical work, something else unfurled, a small, hot seed of resolve. I realized that if they wanted war, they would get one. But it would not be the messy, loud war they'd imagined, sneering and gloating and betrayal in the open. No, it would be a war of order and proof, the sort of battle lawyers like and judges honor. It would be a war with rules. One night, I stood in my kitchen, the red coat hung over the back of a chair like a banner. The notebook lay open on the table, pages already beginning to bulge with receipts and notes. I set my palm on the cover and felt the leather warmth from my own touch. My mother's voice, worn now in memory but still strong, seemed to say the thing she always said when I doubted myself. You were made to keep going, Sierra. You were made to stand. I closed the notebook and said the vow out loud, like a prayer or a promise. If they want war, I will give them war but my way. The coat felt heavier then, not like a burden but like armor. I slept that night with the notebook under my pillow for a while, as if the paper could bless my dreams. I had turned the worst thing that had happened into the first step of a thing I could control. The silence that had once intimidated me now felt more like a room I could open into, with light and witnesses and truth inside. When the sun rose the next morning, I buttoned the coat again, smoothed the collar, and went out to keep working, not with knives or words hurled in anger, but with pens, copies, and a patience that had the weight of a slow, unstoppable tide. The next morning, I buttoned my mother's red coat once more and walked into the Charleston branch of Palmetto State Bank. The glass doors reflected my face back at me, calm, steady, older, but sharper than I'd looked in months. Inside, the air smelled of printer toner and polished wood. I went straight to the desk of a manager I'd known for years, a woman named Felicia with kind eyes but a cautious manner. "I'd like to review any authorizations on my accounts," I said evenly, my voice carrying the authority of a nurse who'd once given orders during midnight codes. "And I'd like copies of every form with my signature for the past year." Felicia hesitated. "Of course, Ms. Cole, but may I ask why?" "Because," I said, leaning forward just slightly, "I have reason to believe someone has been handling my money without permission." A flicker crossed her face, sympathy mixed with doubt. I knew that look well. Older clients who question paperwork are too often seen as confused, even paranoid. Banks like to chalk things up to forgetfulness instead of fraud. It's easier that way. That's how predators slip through the cracks. That's how they win. After some clicking and hushed conversation with another employee, Felicia returned with a folder. "This is what we have on file," she said, sliding it across the desk. I opened it with careful fingers. My breath caught. There it was, a letter of authorization granting Damon access to my savings account. My name written at the bottom, except it wasn't my name. The handwriting leaned too far right, the flourish on the S exaggerated in a way I had never written. It was an imitation, close enough to pass at a glance, but not mine. Damon's carelessness showed in the pen pressure, heavy and impatient. Felicia shifted uncomfortably. "It looks like your signature, Ms. Cole. Are you saying it isn't?" I held the page steady. "I'm saying this is forgery. Damon Williams wrote this, not me." For a long moment, the hum of the bank seemed louder, like the room itself was holding its breath. Felicia nodded slowly, her lips tight. "Then we'll need to escalate this. You should file a fraud report immediately." I tucked the copy into my folder. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of proof. On the walk home, my anger crystallized into clarity. This was bigger than whispers and lies at the dinner table. They had crossed into crime on paper, in ink. That night, I called someone Marla had recommended, Victor Hanley, a lawyer with a reputation for being relentless when it came to protecting seniors. His office was a clutter of law books and newspaper clippings about elder fraud cases he had won. Victor listened without interrupting as I spread out the evidence on his desk. The forged authorization, the dates, my notes. His brow furrowed as he scanned each page. "Classic case," he muttered. "Predators count on institutions doubting older clients. They bank on you being dismissed as forgetful or paranoid. That's their cover. But with this," he tapped the forged signature, "we have something solid." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "And I'll tell you something you probably don't know. Damon Williams is not just greedy, he's desperate. He's been losing thousands at backroom poker tables in North Charleston. Word is, he owes money to the wrong kind of people. That makes him dangerous." The air in the room thickened, gambling debts. Suddenly, their betrayal took on a new shape. This wasn't just Alina and Damon scheming for comfort. It was Damon pulling her into a whirlpool of debt, dragging her down with him, and trying to use me as their lifeline. Victor met my eyes. "Mrs. Cole, you're not dealing with careless children. You're dealing with people cornered by desperation. That's when they become ruthless, which means you need to be smarter, quieter, and 3 steps ahead." I gathered the papers back into my folder, pressing them tight against my chest as though they were a shield. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the knowledge that the battle had truly begun. Walking out of his office into the night air, I whispered to myself, "They think I'm weak, but they've forgotten who raised them, who built all this with nothing." They've forgotten me. The red coat flared behind me as I stepped into the dark, not like fabric, but like armor. When I walked back into my home that night, folder pressed to my chest, I understood something Victor had hinted at but not spoken outright. Survival wasn't just about proof, it was about strategy. If Damon and Alina believed I was still sharp, they would push harder, cover their tracks, and perhaps move faster. But if they thought I was fading, slipping into confusion, they'd relax. And in their carelessness, they'd reveal everything I needed. So, I put on a mask. The next morning, I stuck a neon note to the fridge. Feed the dog at 2 p.m. There was no dog. Later, I taped another to the bathroom mirror. Doctor's appointment yesterday at 3. Wrong date, wrong day. I scattered these little breadcrumbs like candy for crows, pretending not to notice when Alina's eyes lingered on them, her lips curling into a satisfied smirk. Damon chuckled once, holding up one of my reminders as though it were evidence in a trial. "She's slipping faster than we thought," he muttered. Inside, my blood boiled. But outwardly, I let my shoulders droop, allowed my sentences to trail off, even asked Alina the same question twice at dinner just to watch her lean back smugly, convinced her plan was working. And I wrote in my notebook later that night, "Sometimes survival means letting them believe in the mask you wear." But while they grew careless, I grew watchful. I planted a small recorder under the lace runner on the dining table, its red light hidden beneath the folds. Another I tucked in the living room, near the bookshelf where Damon liked to take his calls. And sure enough, within days, I caught him. One evening, Damon swaggered through the kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear. I pretended to fumble with the kettle, back turned, while the recorder caught his words. "Yet," he laughed. "Almost done. The place will be mine before the end of summer. Big house, clean title, you'll see." The words cut me, but they also steadied me. Proof, evidence in his own voice. Each night I added more to my growing archive. Timestamps, quotes, copies. A story building not in whispers but in ink and recordings, something no lawyer, no judge, no neighbor could deny. But with every piece of evidence, the tension inside me stretched tighter. I knew confrontation was coming. A storm was gathering in my own living room, and I would have to face it. Yet I remembered Victor's words, "Don't fight with fury, fight with proof." So I stayed quiet, head bowed, mask firmly in place, while beneath the surface I sharpened every tool I had. They thought they were closing in on their victory, but I was the one setting the stage. And soon, the curtain would rise. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, striping the living room in long bars of gold and shadow. I had chosen that hour deliberately, when Damon was home from work but still restless, when Alina was tired but not yet softened by evening wine. The room smelled faintly of lavender polish and tension. I sat in my armchair, back straight, wearing my mother's red coat even though the house was warm. The folder of evidence rested on my lap like a sacred book. Bell rang. Alina looked up from the sofa, frowning. "Who's that?" Before Damon could answer, I rose. I invited some company. I opened the door and there they stood, Victor Hanley, sharp in his navy suit, a notary public clutching a leather briefcase, and a state investigator whose badge caught the light. Their presence filled the doorway like a wall of truth. Alina's face drained of color. Damon's jaw clenched, suspicion flashing into anger. "Mom," Alina said quickly, rising to her feet, "what is this?" I gestured for them all to sit. "It's time," I said calmly, "that we had an honest conversation." The notary sat up at the dining table, clicking open his pen. The investigator placed a small recorder on the coffee table. Victor, standing tall, folded his hands. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams," he said, "we're here at the request of Mrs. Cole. She has evidence to present. You may want to sit down." Alina's lips trembled as she sank into the couch. Damon remained standing, arms crossed, his face hardening by the second. I pressed play on my phone. The room filled with their voices, the secret conversation they thought I'd never hear. Alina's cold dismissal, "She's a burden, we'll transfer the house, put her in care." Damon's smug assurance, "It'll be ours by summer." Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Damon's eyes narrowed into slits. You, he hissed, but I wasn't finished. From my folder, I pulled a signed confession from the bank employee who had handled Damon's fraudulent authorization. The signature gleamed in blue ink, undeniable. I laid it on the coffee table. Forgery, I said evenly. And here's the proof. Then I produced copies of Damon's gambling debts, receipts, IO, names of bookies scrawled across crumpled slips. Victor slid them across the table like a dealer in a game Damon had already lost. This, Victor explained, establishes motive, not just greed, desperation. Damon's face flushed red. You have no right, he lunged forward, but the investigator stepped between us with quiet authority. Elena began to cry, her hands shaking. Mom, please, she whispered. We didn't mean we were scared. Damon, he made mistakes. I was just what? My voice cut sharper than I expected. Just plotting my disappearance. Just planning to erase me from the very house I built. Spare me your tears, Elena. I raised you to know better. For once, she had no answer. The silence was broken by a knock, firm, deliberate. 3 uniformed officers entered, one holding a folded piece of paper. Mrs. Serafina Cole. Yes, I said, standing tall. He nodded. We have a warrant to search the premises. Signed this morning. Any resistance will be considered obstruction. Damon swore under his breath, but Elena only sagged back into the sofa, her tears falling into her lap. And I, calm, collected, armored in my mother's red coat, simply stepped aside, allowing the law to walk into the home where betrayal had tried to take root. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one on trial. The night the police carried out the search warrant, I thought the storm had broken. I believed the truth was finally out in the open, that justice would have its day, and that I could finally breathe. But what I didn't understand then was that betrayal inside 4 walls is one kind of wound. Betrayal in the public square, that is a wound that cuts even deeper. Elena and Damon were arrested that evening, handcuffed on my front porch as the neighbors peeked through their curtains. For one brief moment, I felt vindicated. But less than 48 hours later, they were out on bail, walking free with nothing more than a court date on the horizon. And that's when their retaliation began. At first, it was whispers online. A post on Facebook, written under Elena's name. Please pray for my mother. She's been declining for months. We tried to help her, but she's confused and paranoid. She's accusing us of crimes we would never commit. Then came the videos. Edited clips from family gatherings, spliced together to make me look unstable, me repeating a question twice because I hadn't heard the answer, me misplacing my keys, me sitting silently at the dinner table with a tired expression. They cut out the laughter, the explanations, the truth. What remained was a cruel caricature, a confused, aging woman supposedly losing her grip on reality. The neighbors started to talk. At the grocery store, I caught them staring at me, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. Poor thing, must be dementia. Even in church, where I had sung hymns beside the same people for decades, I felt the space open around me like an invisible fence. Friends avoided my eyes, offering polite nods instead of warm embraces. It was then I realized, public shame can be more devastating than private betrayal. When the world around you starts to doubt your sanity, it feels as though you've lost not only your reputation but your very place in the community. Then the letters arrived. Folded sheets slipped under my door, scrawled with jagged handwriting, "Drop the charges or you'll regret it." Another, "Old women get hurt when they stir up trouble." One night, I found an envelope taped to my mailbox with only 3 words inside. "We are watching." My hands shook as I read them. For the first time since this began, fear truly seeped into my bones. I began locking every window, checking the doors twice before bed. I stopped walking to the market in the mornings, afraid of footsteps behind me. For a while, I felt myself unraveling. The walls of my own home felt too close, the silence too loud. I would sit at the kitchen table with my head in my hands, whispering, maybe they're right. Maybe it's not worth it. Maybe I should let it go. But then I would see my notebook, lying there, thick with receipts, notes, and recordings. My handwriting steady, the ink a testament to the truth I had lived. Every page reminded me that I was not confused. I was not paranoid. I was a woman fighting for her life and her dignity. And then there was Marla. She came over with casseroles, with strong tea, with words that anchored me when the tide threatened to pull me under. They can make the whole world believe a lie, she told me, placing her hand over mine. But I know you, Sierra. I know the woman who worked double shifts, who never once faltered when her daughter needed her. You are not losing your mind. You are finding your courage. Her faith in me lit a small flame where despair had taken root, so I dried my tears. I picked up my pen. I wrote another entry in my journal, dated and signed. July 14, received 3 anonymous threats. Evidence preserved. Fear is real, but so is my resolve. I will not back down. And in that moment, I knew I had survived worse. I had carried a child alone, fought for every inch of stability, endured years of exhaustion and sacrifice. If I could survive that, I could survive this storm too. Elena and Damon had tried to steal my dignity with papers and signatures. Now they were trying to erase me with shame. But they had underestimated me again. The morning it arrived, I nearly didn't open it. A plain cardboard box sat on my porch, stamped with the name of a law firm from Colombia. At first, I thought it was another cruel trick, another anonymous threat. But the return address told a different story. It was from the executor of my late mother's estate. The will had been tied up for years in red tape, small family disputes dragging things out. Now, finally, a piece of her had found its way back to me. Inside the box were her things, a tin sewing kit, her rosary, and a bundle of letters tied with twine, the paper yellowed with time. My breath caught when I recognized her handwriting, steady, strong, unflinching. I untied the twine with trembling fingers and opened the first letter. My Serafina, it began, life will give you battles you never wanted, but never, never let anyone steal your dignity. That is the one thing you own that no thief, no betrayal, no loss can touch unless you let it. Tears blurred the ink as I read on. Each letter carried her voice across the years, reminders of who I was, who she raised me to be, a woman who bent but did not break, a woman who endured. By the time I placed the last letter back in the bundle, I felt something inside me shift. The shame, the fear, the doubt, they loosened their grip. In their place came a renewed resolve. My mother had fought her whole life for respect in a world that too often dismissed women like her. I owed it to her and to myself not to surrender now. That afternoon, I called Victor. File the full suit. I told him my voice was steady. No settlements, no bargains, we take this all the way. Victor exhaled sharply on the other end of the line, almost a sigh of pride. That's what I hoped you'd say, Sierra, and I've got something else in mind. It's time to take this story beyond the courtroom. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in the bright lights of a local television studio. The anchor introduced me as Charleston resident Serafina Cole, a retired nurse and community member. My hands shook at first, but then I remembered my mother's letters. I lifted my chin and told the truth. I spoke of the voice message, the forged documents, the way my own daughter had tried to erase me. I told of the shame campaign, the whispers in the grocery aisles, the anonymous threats taped to my mailbox. But I also spoke of the larger truth that my story was not unique, that thousands of elders across the country were being manipulated, discarded, and stripped of their dignity by the very families they had sacrificed for. The camera's red light blinked as I leaned forward. If my shame can protect one more elder from exploitation, I said, voice firm, then I will carry it with pride. I am not confused. I am not paranoid. I am a woman who worked her whole life, and I deserve to live my final years with dignity. So do all our elders. The interview aired that evening. By morning, the tide had shifted. At the market, neighbors who once looked away now stopped me with gentle hands on my arm. We saw you on TV, Serafina. We believe you. At church, instead of distance, there were embraces, tight, tearful, full of apologies for their silence. Even the clerk at the post office slipped me a note with a simple message. We stand with you. The shame that had once isolated me became the very light that drew others close. My story was no longer just mine. It belonged to every elder who had been silenced, every parent betrayed, every neighbor dismissed. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the ground under me steady again. The courthouse smelled of old wood and nerves. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long beams across the polished floor. I sat at the plaintiff's table in my red coat, hands folded neatly over the evidence folder I had carried like armor for weeks. Victor sat beside me, calm but sharp-eyed, his tie knotted with precision. Across the aisle, Damon leaned back in his chair with the smirk of a man who still believed the world could bend to his will. Elena sat beside him, pale, her hands twisting together in her lap. When the judge entered, the room hushed. Case number 74-211, the clerk read, Cole versus Williams. It began with the paper trail. The bank representative took the stand first, confirming under oath that Damon had submitted a letter of authorization with a forged signature. The judge studied the document, then looked over his glasses at Damon. This is criminal fraud, he said flatly. Next came the gambling debts. The investigator unfolded copies of IOUs, betting slips, and text messages Damon had exchanged with local bookies. Each piece landed like a stone in the growing pile of evidence. Damon shifted, his jaw tightening, but his face betrayed no shame. Then the insurance documents. Victor laid out the forged policy, pointing to the mismatched signatures, the dates that proved I was nowhere near the office where the paperwork had been signed. The courtroom murmured, fraud, forgery, exploitation. It was all there in black and white. Elena took the stand last. She tried to hold her composure, but the weight of truth pressed too hard. Her voice cracked as Victor played the voicemail aloud for the court, her own words condemning her. She's a burden, we'll move her into a facility, it'll be like she's already gone. By the time the recording ended, Elena was trembling. She broke down mid-testimony, sobbing into her hands. I didn't mean it, she cried. I was scared. Damon told me it was the only way. Mom, I'm sorry, please forgive me. The judge's gavel struck once, silencing the room. He delivered his ruling with the weight of finality. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mrs. Serafina Cole. Her property shall remain in her possession. Her pension and insurance accounts are secured under court protection. Furthermore, a restraining order is granted against Damon and Elena Williams, effective immediately. I closed my eyes, a long breath escaping me. It was over. The house, my pension, my dignity, they were mine again. As the bailiff moved to escort them out, Elena turned toward me, her face streaked with tears. Mom, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please forgive me. I stood, my hands steady now, my voice calm but firm. Forgiveness is free, Elena, but trust. I shook my head. Trust is earned, and you've spent it all. Her sobs echoed down the hallway as they were led away. Damon never looked back. I remained standing in the quiet courtroom, reflecting on the truth I had just spoken. Forgiveness and forgetting are not the same thing. Forgiveness releases me from the poison of anger. But forgetting would erase the lesson, the scars, the truth, and I could not afford to forget. I gathered my folder, smoothed the sleeve of my red coat, and walked out into the Charleston sunlight, not victorious, but free. A year has passed since the trial, and my life no longer feels like a battlefield. The house that once held so much pain was sold on my own terms. I took the money and chose a new chapter, a bright, bustling senior community along the Charleston riverfront. From my balcony, I can see the water glinting in the afternoon sun, boats sliding past, gulls circling above. It's noisy, alive, filled with stories. Exactly where I belong. I spend my mornings painting, brush in hand, colors spilling across the canvas. My mother's red coat often hangs on the back of my chair, its presence steady, reminding me of where I came from. In the afternoons, I volunteer with a foundation for abandoned elders, those who have no family left to speak for them. I sit with them, listen, and remind them they still matter. At night, I teach a small storytelling class, helping other seniors turn their memories into words, showing them that every life has a narrative worth preserving. The pain hasn't vanished, but it has been reshaped into something useful, something alive. Last month, I was invited to showcase my work at a small art exhibition in town. On the night of the opening, I slipped my arms into the red wool sleeves once again. That coat, my mother's gift, my armor, had walked with me through betrayal and survival. Now it would walk with me into something new. As I stood in front of my paintings, guests moving softly around me, I touched the fabric of the coat and thought, this is not just survival, this is renewal. I've come to realize something in this year of rebuilding. Our children may carry our blood, but they do not always carry our values. Respect is not guaranteed by birth, it must be chosen, cultivated, lived. At 68, I finally learned that my life, my choices, my dignity are still mine. No one, not even the daughter I gave everything to, can take that from me unless I let them. So I turn to you, the ones who have listened to my story, and I ask, if you were me, what would you have done? And if you were me, would you let your daughter back into your life? The question lingers in the air, unanswered, because the truth is I'm still deciding. I didn't get the fairy tale ending. My daughter didn't suddenly turn back into the little girl who once held my hand. The scars remain, but so do I. I moved forward. I found community, I found purpose, and I discovered something I should have known all along. Respect isn't inherited, it's chosen. At 68, I finally learned that my life is still mine to live. Maybe my story isn't about revenge. Maybe it's about survival, about reclaiming dignity when others tried to take it. And maybe it's about remembering that betrayal doesn't have the final word, healing does. But let me ask you, if you were me, would you let your child back into your life? And what does forgiveness mean to you, forgetting, or simply moving forward? If this story touched you, please subscribe and share. Because the more we tell these stories, the harder it becomes for silence and shame to win.